The waiter had no idea who the man sitting at table 12 truly was. He only saw a simple shirt, worn sneakers, dark skin. Nothing about the visitor suggested money or power or influence, so he made a choice that would change the entire restaurant by the end of the night. Because when he insulted that man, in front of dozens of people, he believed there would be no consequences. He believed he could get away with it, but the truth was already walking toward him, and soon every single person in the building would understand that they had misjudged. Someone they should have welcomed. This is where the trouble began. Sunset City's most famous dining spot. The Rosa Hall District Grill was buzzing with its usual energy. Soft music drifted through the air. Fine silverware shined under warm lights. Every table was filled with people dressed in their best. Expensive perfumes floated around the room. It was the type of place where even pulling out your chair felt luxurious. Into this world stepped Daniel Hart, 39 years old, a quiet achiever, and recently, the mind behind one of the fastest-growing logistics companies in the country. His firm had closed a huge international contract earlier that afternoon. All he wanted now was a peaceful meal to celebrate privately. Daniel never liked attention. He avoided red carpets, fancy launch parties, and any flashy lifestyle that came with success. He preferred simple clothes and calm places. So that evening, he arrived in black jeans, a soft gray t-shirt, and running shoes that had seen too many miles. Nothing about him suggested he belonged in a restaurant where guests ordered wine older than their own children. He walked through the main doors with a calm smile, taking in the scene. White tablecloths, crystal glasses, people laughing gently as if they were afraid to disturb the atmosphere. Daniel breathed in slowly. He had worked hard to reach this point in life. Tonight was for enjoying something good without needing to impress anyone. At the reception stand, a hostess named Lily greeted him with genuine warmth. She checked the reservations and immediately found his name. Her smile stayed kind as she guided him toward a small table near the large street windows. The seat offered a beautiful view of the city lights glowing against the early evening sky. It was one of the restaurant's best spots. For a moment, Daniel simply sat there and let the comfort settle over him. He had spent years being the only black man in rooms filled with executives who judged him silently long before he ever spoke. Yet today he felt proud, relaxed, ready to enjoy a quiet meal. Then everything shifted. A shadow paused beside his table. Daniel looked up to find a waiter standing stiffly. He wore a crisp uniform and a name tag that read Ryan. Tall, thin, eyes that scanned Daniel not with curiosity, but with quick judgment. "Good evening," Ryan said. The words were polite, but the tone was not. It held a sharp edge that sliced the warm atmosphere instantly. "May I get you water, still water, please?" Daniel replied. He kept his voice steady, refusing to let the tone bother him. Ryan nodded in a way that felt more like a dismissal than acknowledgement. His mouth tightened for a moment. His eyes narrowed slightly. Then he turned and walked away without another word. Daniel brushed off the odd interaction. He opened the menu, scanning dishes that cost more than many people's weekly groceries. He smiled to himself. Success had its price, but it also had its rewards. Tonight, he wanted to enjoy one of those rewards. But the quiet moment did not last long. When Ryan returned with the water, he placed the glass harder than he needed to. A small splash jumped onto the table, ready to order. He did not ask it as a question. It sounded more like a demand. "Could I have a few minutes?" Daniel replied. He stayed polite. He stayed calm. "Take your time," Ryan said. But the words came coated in cold sarcasm. Daniel watched him walk away, moving smoothly from table to table with a completely different attitude, smiling at a couple dressed in designer clothes, laughing softly with a group celebrating a birthday, being every bit the attentive professional, yet with Daniel, he was someone else entirely. Daniel felt the tension begin to grow, pushing gently against his peace. The room was beautiful, but suddenly the atmosphere felt heavier. He took a sip of water and reminded himself that tonight was meant to be a celebration, not a battle. Still, the question lingered. Why was he being treated differently? Minutes passed, then more minutes. Ryan seemed to avoid looking in Daniel's direction unless absolutely necessary. Daniel tried to focus on the menu again, but the feeling of being unwelcome began to settle deep inside him. Finally, Ryan returned. "Have you decided?" he asked. Sharp tone. No warmth. "I will have the rib steak," Daniel said. "Medium rare." "Mashed potatoes on the side," Ryan wrote quickly without raising his head. "Anything else? A glass of the house red, please?" Ryan sighed quietly, but loud enough for Daniel to hear. He then walked away, leaving a trail of discomfort in his wake. Daniel leaned back in his chair. He scanned the room again. Everything appeared perfect, except the way he was being treated. Something inside him tightened. Not anger, not fear. Just a familiar ache. He had lived with this type of treatment for years. Soft insults. Silent judgments. Moments where people believed they had him figured out. Before he even opened his mouth, he turned his attention back to the window, hoping the city lights would help clear his thoughts. But the night was not finished testing him. When Ryan returned with bread, he placed the basket carelessly. The edge almost knocked over Daniel's water. "Your bread," he said, sounding annoyed. Daniel let out a slow breath. His patience was steady, but not endless. "Is everything okay, sir?" a gentle voice suddenly asked. It was Lily, the hostess. She stood near his table with genuine concern in her eyes. Daniel wanted to tell her everything, but he did not want to create a scene. He simply nodded and thanked her, but the truth was growing heavier inside him. And someone else had noticed the change too. An older man sitting at the next table looked at Daniel with soft understanding, as if to say he recognized what was happening. When the steak arrived, it was placed on the table with a loud thud. Daniel stared at the plate. The food looked perfect, but the disrespect was impossible to ignore. He thanked Ryan anyway, because dignity was not something he planned to surrender. Across the room, another man muttered something under his breath after glancing at Daniel. His wife nudged him sharply. Daniel caught the exchange. He did not need to hear the words. He had heard versions of them his entire life. That was when Daniel knew he could not stay silent forever. The pressure in the room was building. The small moments of disrespect were stacking one by one. Something inside him shifted. He knew the night was not going to end quietly. Not anymore. Daniel raised his hand as Ryan passed by again. The waiter slowed down reluctantly. "Yes," he said, sounding impatient. "There's wine on the tablecloth," Daniel said. He pointed calmly to the dark stain the careless pour had left behind. "Could I get a napkin or something to clean it?" Ryan looked at the stain, then shrugged. "It is just a little spill. I will send someone." His voice was flat, cold, dismissive. "That someone will not be you?" Daniel asked. "I am busy," Ryan replied. He walked away before Daniel could respond. A couple sitting nearby exchanged troubled glances. They had heard everything. Daniel offered them a small nod, letting them know he was fine, even though his patience was wearing thin. He was tired of being tested. Tired of being judged by strangers who knew nothing about him. Minutes passed. No one came to clean the table. No one refilled his water. No one checked if he needed anything at all. Daniel had become invisible in the one place he had come to celebrate a major milestone in his life. He watched Ryan again, carefully observing how he treated everyone else. Warm smiles. Friendly conversation. Quick service. A world of difference compared to what Daniel received. Daniel felt a slow heat rising in his chest. A frustration he rarely allowed to show. He stayed silent, but inside he knew this could not continue. Something had to shift. His phone buzzed softly in his pocket. A message from his close friend Mark. "What happened?" "You sound annoyed," Daniel typed quickly. "You would not believe the service they gave me at Rosa Hall Grill," Mark replied almost instantly. "I am 10 minutes away. Do not leave." Daniel felt a small wave of relief wash through him. He knew Mark well enough to understand that his arrival could change the direction of the night. He placed the phone face down and breathed slowly, letting the room settle around him. By the time he finished the last bite of his steak, Ryan returned again. "Anything else?" he asked. No friendliness. no interest. Just a desire to move on. "I would like the bill," Daniel said. He met Ryan's eyes for the first time that evening. His calm expression held a weight that could not be ignored. Ryan nodded and left. A few minutes later, he returned with the payment folder. Daniel opened it and felt the air tighten around him. At the bottom of the receipt, in messy handwriting, were the words, "Dress code is business casual." "For your information," Daniel stared at the note. The message was clear. It was personal. It was intentional. It was meant to belittle him. The room felt heavier, as if every sound was being filtered through thick walls. He closed the folder slowly, keeping his expression controlled. He looked up at Ryan, who stood nearby folding napkins. Too casual for someone who had just crossed a line. Daniel opened his mouth to speak, but a familiar voice echoed from across the restaurant before he could say anything. Daniel. Every head turned toward the entrance. A man in a tailored navy suit strode inside with confident, determined steps. His presence carried authority without needing to raise his voice. It was Mark. Daniel leaned back slightly, a small smile forming. He knew Mark would come, but he did not expect him to arrive with such commanding energy. Mark walked straight to Daniel's table and pulled him into a firm, warm embrace. "I had no idea you were here tonight," he said. "If I knew, I would have shut this place down for you." The room shifted instantly. People whispered. Ryan went pale the moment he realized who had just arrived. Mark turned to the table. "What is this stain? And why is your glass empty? And why does this table look like no one has cared for it?" His eyes landed on Ryan like a spotlight. Ryan froze. "You are the waiter here, correct?" Mark asked. His voice was calm, but the sharp edge beneath it was unmistakable. Ryan swallowed hard. "Yes, sir." Mark looked at him with steady, controlled disappointment. "Then, explain this service." Ryan opened his mouth, closed it again. No words came out. Daniel rested a hand on Mark's arm. "It is all right. Just a rough night." Mark shook his head slightly. "I do not accept that. Not in a place I helped build. Not for someone who deserves far better." Around the room, diners watched intently. Some stared with guilt, some with curiosity, some with admiration. Mark faced Ryan directly. "Do you have any idea who this man is?" Ryan gave a small shake of his head. His voice barely reached a whisper. "No, sir." Mark nodded once. "Then let me tell you. This is Daniel Hart, founder of Heartline Systems, the company that helped half this city survive during last year's supply crisis. The man whose investments and donations built schools, shelters, job programs across the region." The restaurant fell silent. People who had judged Daniel earlier suddenly looked at him with wide eyes. Mark continued. "And this is how you treat him? With disrespect? With arrogance? With assumptions that have no place here?" Ryan stood frozen. His hands trembled slightly. His breathing quickened. Daniel stayed quiet, but his gaze held steady. He wanted Ryan to understand exactly what this moment meant. Not for punishment, but for awareness. "Now tell me," Mark said, his voice calm but cutting. "Why did you treat him differently the moment he walked in?" Ryan's silence stretched painfully. The truth pressed down on him. He looked at Daniel, then at the floor. "I did not mean to. It was not personal. I just thought." "Exactly," Daniel said softly. "You thought? You looked at me and created a story in your head. And you acted on it before you ever gave me a chance." The room felt like it was holding its breath. Every set of eyes was on Daniel now. Not because of his status, but because his words carried a truth many people recognized. Mark folded his arms. "One cannot allow this in my establishment. Not ever. Ryan, you are dismissed for the evening." "We will discuss the rest tomorrow," Ryan hesitated, but Mark's expression made any argument impossible. He walked away with his head down, disappearing into the back. Daniel sat quietly. He felt no triumph in this moment. No victory. Only a reminder of how many times he had lived through similar moments before. Mark sighed, rubbing a hand over his forehead. "Daniel, I am truly sorry. You deserved better. This should never have happened." "It is not just about me," Daniel said. "If this happens to me, It can happen to anyone. This needs to change for every person who sits at a table here. Mark nodded slowly. You are right, and it will. More people in the room watched Daniel now, their expressions shifting from surprise to reflection. A few looked ashamed. A few looked thoughtful. A few looked inspired. But the night was still unfolding. There was more to come. And Daniel was not finished yet. The room remained silent as Ryan disappeared into the back. People shifted in their seats, pretending not to stare, yet every pair of eyes kept drifting back to Daniel. He felt their attention like a heavy coat, warm in some places, uncomfortable in others. He did not want to be the center of drama. He had come for a quiet meal, not a lesson for an entire restaurant. But life rarely asked his permission before placing him at the center of moments like this. Mark signaled to another server. A young man rushed over, nervous but determined to do better. He apologized softly and began replacing the stained tablecloth with careful hands. He refilled Daniel's glass, brought fresh bread, asked if he could get anything else. Daniel thanked him kindly, but his mind was elsewhere. He could feel the atmosphere in the room shifting again. A subtle ripple. People were processing what they had just witnessed. Some uncomfortable. Some ashamed. Some trying to understand their own reactions. Then a gentle voice broke the tension. "Excuse me, Daniel?" Looked up to see an elderly woman standing beside his table. Short silver hair. Warm but firm expression. She held her purse in both hands as if steadying herself. "I hope I am not intruding," she said. "I just wanted to tell you something." Daniel nodded. "Please, go ahead." She took a soft breath. "I watched what happened here tonight. I saw the way that young man treated you from the moment you walked in, and I want you to know that your patience, your calm, and your dignity were remarkable. You handled the entire situation with a strength that many people would struggle to show." Daniel felt the tightness in his chest ease slightly. "Thank you," he said. "I appreciate that more than you know." Her eyes softened. "I hope this place learns from you tonight. And I hope the rest of us do too." She gave a small bow of her head and returned to her table. The moment she sat, others nearby began to clap softly. The sound started like a whisper, gentle, hesitant, then it grew stronger. Filling the room with an unexpected warmth, Daniel felt his throat tighten. Not from pride, but from the weight of knowing how often this story played out in different places, with different faces and far worse outcomes. Mark stood beside him, watching the scene unfold with a complex expression: pride, regret, responsibility. "You've given all of us something to think about tonight," Mark said. "More than you realize." Daniel shook his head softly. "I am not here for applause. I am here for change. And change cannot happen if only one person sees the problem." Mark nodded. His eyes carried a promise, one that Daniel hoped would last beyond tonight. The applause faded. People returned to their meals, but the energy in the room had transformed. Conversations were quieter. Eyes were more aware. Posture more thoughtful. It was as if the entire restaurant had been forced to confront something uncomfortable within themselves. Daniel stood slowly. He placed his napkin on the table. "Thank you for stepping in," he said to Mark. "But there is still work to do." Mark lowered his voice. "There will be. I will make sure of it." Daniel gave him a firm nod before turning toward the exit. The room seemed to open a quiet path for him as he left, a silent sign of respect he had not been given when he first walked in. When he stepped outside, the cool night air met him like a breath he did not know he needed. He paused on the sidewalk, gazing at the restaurant's sign glowing above the doors. The place had always stood for luxury and status. Tonight it had become something else entirely. Amir Mark joined him a moment later, pulling the door closed behind him. "Daniel," he said softly, "you should not have had to experience that here. You should not have to experience it anywhere. But you stood your ground with such grace." Daniel looked at him, the city lights reflecting softly in his eyes. "This is not about grace. This is about making sure the next person walks in and feels like they belong from the moment they step through the door. Not judged. Not questioned. Not dismissed." Mark nodded slowly. "I understand. and I will change things here. I promise you that. Daniel placed a hand on his shoulder. Good, because it is not just about this restaurant. It is about the world we all live in. Mark looked down for a moment, absorbing the weight behind the words. Then he straightened with renewed determination. Daniel checked his phone. A new message from a friend popped up. Proud of you. We celebrate tomorrow. He smiled faintly. He needed that. He needed to be reminded that despite the unfairness he faced, he was not alone. He started walking down the quiet street. The world around him hummed softly. Cars passed by. Shops closed for the night. People laughed in the distance. But the night felt different now. He carried a sense of purpose with him. Heavy, important, real. Behind him, through the restaurant windows, he could see Mark addressing the staff. Mark's posture was firm. His voice carried through the glass faintly. He was taking responsibility. He was setting new standards. He was holding people accountable. Daniel nodded to himself. It was a start. A small step, but a step all the same. And deep down, he knew the night was not about revenge. It was about dignity, respect, and the quiet strength that comes from standing up even. When you are tired of standing up, he walked away with steady steps. He knew this night mattered, not just for him, but for anyone who had ever been told through someone's actions that they did not belong. The world still had cracks, but change could begin anywhere, even in a crowded restaurant on an ordinary evening. Daniel continued walking down the sidewalk, letting the rhythm of his steps calm the storm that had been building inside him. But even with the cool air brushing against his face, the weight of the night stayed with him. He had spent years learning how to hold his composure through moments like this, yet every time it happened, it chipped away at something quiet and personal inside him. He reached the corner and paused, watching the glow of passing headlights paint soft streaks across the pavement. He wondered how many people went through similar moments every day, moments where they were judged before they were known. Moments where dignity had to be defended instead of given freely. He thought of strangers whose names he did not know, but whose experiences he understood deeply. Behind him, the restaurant door opened again. Mark stepped out and jogged to catch up. He was breathing harder than usual, as if the conversation inside had taken something out of him. Daniel stopped walking. "What now?" he asked gently. Mark let out a long breath. "I talked to the whole team," he said, "and I meant every word. What happened tonight can never happen again. Not here. Not anywhere under my watch." Daniel studied him carefully. "You are trying," he said, "and that matters. But trying is not enough by itself. People need to understand why moments like this cut deeper than they seem from the outside." "I know," Mark said quietly, "and I want to understand more. I want to do better. I want this place to be one where everyone feels welcome, no matter what they are wearing or what they look like." Daniel nodded, appreciating the honesty in his friend's voice. The streetlights cast long shadows behind them, stretching across the quiet road. Mark hesitated, then asked something he had been afraid to voice earlier. "Daniel, how often does this happen to you?" "Really?" Daniel looked at the ground, then up at the night sky, then back at Mark. "More often than you think. Sometimes louder, sometimes quieter, but always there in some form. It is like walking into a room and feeling eyes decide your worth before you say a single word." Mark's shoulders sagged. "That is not right. No one should live like that." Daniel gave a small, sad smile, "But many do. People who are stronger than anyone realizes, because they have to be. People who learn how to navigate these moments without breaking. But that does not mean we should accept them." Mark stepped closer. "Then help me change it. Help me make this place better. Help me make sure my staff understands what respect actually looks like." Daniel considered it. He saw sincerity in Mark's face. Not guilt, but real willingness to learn. "All right," Daniel said. "I can do that. But only if you are committed. Not for tonight, for every day after." "You have my word," Mark said firmly. For a moment, they stood there. Two men who had known each other for years yet, were only now stepping into a deeper understanding of one another. A car drove by slowly, the sound fading into the distance. Daniel felt the weight inside him shift just a little, not disappearing, but settling into a shape he could hold without pain. Then a voice called from across the street. "Daniel." "Mark." They turned to see the older man who had given Daniel the sympathetic glance earlier. He approached them slowly, leaning on a wooden cane. His eyes were warm, thoughtful. He reached them with steady steps and offered Daniel a small nod. "I wanted to speak to you before the moment passed," the man said. "That was not easy to watch. But you handled it with more patience than I. Think most people could manage." Daniel responded with a quiet thank you. The man continued. "I hope my grandchildren grow up in a world where moments like what happened tonight no longer exist. And I hope people like you continue to remind us what strength looks like. Not loud strength, not angry strength, but the kind that holds steady without losing its humanity." Daniel felt something warm rise in his chest. "Thank you," he said softly. "I hope so too." The man gave another respectful nod and began walking back toward the restaurant. Mark watched him go, then turned back to Daniel. "You changed people tonight, even if you did not mean to." Daniel shook his head gently. "People change themselves." I just held a mirror up for a moment. A soft breeze passed over them. The night felt quieter now, more open. Less heavy. Mark placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "Come back tomorrow. Let me show you the difference. Let me show you that tonight mattered." Daniel thought for a moment. He looked back at the restaurant glowing in the distance. He remembered the looks on the faces inside. Some ashamed, some understanding, some changed. Maybe tomorrow would be different. Maybe it would not. But the attempt meant something. "All right," Daniel said.
Mark smiled.
Relieved, Daniel gave one last glance at the building he had walked into hoping for peace, and had walked out of carrying a lesson that was larger than one night. Then he turned and continued down the street, steady and purposeful, knowing the story was not finished yet, because change never happens in a single moment. It happens in the steps that follow. Daniel walked farther down the street, letting the city's quiet rhythm settle into him. But even as the night softened around him, he sensed there was still more to unfold. Change had begun inside that restaurant, but change rarely ended where it started. It continued in conversations, in reflections, in the silent choices people made long after the moment had passed. Reached the corner again, intending to head home. But before he could cross, his phone buzzed a second time. A long message arrived from a young employee at Heartline Systems, someone Daniel barely knew. "Sir, I saw what happened. One of our clients was at the restaurant tonight. They told me everything. I just want you to know that what you said really impacted them. They said the whole room changed because of you." Daniel exhaled quietly. He had not intended for the night to echo beyond those walls, yet here it was, already moving further than he expected. As he slid his phone back into his pocket, footsteps approached behind him. Slow, hesitant footsteps. He turned, expecting Mark again. Instead, it was the young server who had replaced the stained tablecloth earlier. He stood a few feet away, breathing nervously. His hands tugged at the apron tied around his waist. "Sir," he said softly, "I know. You probably do not want to talk about what happened tonight. But I needed to find you before you left the area." Daniel's eyebrows lifted slightly. "I am listening." The young man swallowed hard. His name tag read Ben. He looked barely 20. "I want to apologize," he said. "Not for what I did, because I did not treat you that way, but because I saw it. I saw the disrespect. I saw the judgment, and I did nothing. I froze, and I should not have." Daniel studied him calmly. "Why did you freeze?" Ben hesitated. "Because I am new. Because Ryan has worked there longer. Because I was afraid of losing my job. But fear is not an excuse. You deserved someone to stand up for you in the moment, and I did not step forward." Daniel nodded slowly. He could hear the sincerity in the young man's voice. People did not always fall into categories of good or bad. Most simply fought invisible battles inside themselves. "What matters," Daniel said gently, "is what you do next. Not what you failed to do, but what you learn from it." Ben's throat tightened. "I want to learn." and I want to be someone who steps forward next time. Daniel placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Then start there, one moment at a time. Ben nodded, relief filling his expression. Thank you, sir, for everything you handled today. The restaurant will not be the same after this. None of us will. Ben walked back toward the restaurant with a new sense of purpose. Daniel watched him go, realizing something unexpected. Maybe tonight was not only about exposing the wrong, maybe it was about awakening the right. He turned again, ready to continue his walk home. But the night still held one more voice. Daniel. It came from the opposite direction. A woman in a simple business suit approached, someone Daniel did not recognize. She looked both nervous and determined. I am sorry to stop you, she said. I was one of the people sitting near the back. I saw how you were treated. I am ashamed to say I did not do anything either. But your words, they changed something for me tonight. Daniel offered her a gentle look. What changed? She took a breath. I realized I have witnessed moments like that before, in other places, with other people. And I always sat quietly because I told myself it was not my place. But maybe silence is part of the damage. It's maybe doing nothing helps the wrong side. Daniel felt her words settle deeply inside him. Silence is not neutral, he said. It carries weight. Sometimes silence is exactly what keeps things from ever improving. She nodded, her eyes glowing with new understanding. I needed to hear that. Thank you. She walked away, leaving Daniel with a clarity he had not expected tonight. The world did not change because he stood up, changed because others began to see why they needed to. He finally continued walking down the empty street, feeling lighter with every step. The city lights shimmered across the buildings. Soft breeze drifted past him. For the first time that night, he felt something close to peace. Back inside Raza Hall Grill, Mark finished speaking to the staff. He dismissed the team for the night except for the senior manager. They walked through the restaurant together, discussing new training, new expectations, new standards that would be built from the ground up. This was not damage control. This was reform. Ryan's locker was already empty. His resignation letter sat on the desk without a signature, as if he had left before he could face the consequences. The manager sighed, knowing this night would be remembered long after Ryan's absence faded. Daniel kept walking until he reached the river bridge. The water glimmered beneath him. He leaned on the railing and allowed his thoughts to settle. He had not planned to teach a lesson tonight. He had not walked into that restaurant wanting to confront anything. He only wanted good food and quiet celebration. But some stories do not wait for permission. They unfold because they need to be told. And sometimes the people who tell them never meant to become the voice others needed. He stayed on the bridge for several minutes, listening to the flow of the water. Eventually he whispered something to himself, gentle but firm. Dignity is not something I will ever let go of. He pushed away from the railing with calm strength and continued the walk home, step by steady step. Behind him, the lights of Rosa Hall Grill glowed like a promise. A promise that the next person who walked through those doors would be seen differently, respected differently, welcomed without conditions. And somewhere inside that restaurant, in the silence left after the crowd had gone, its message lingered like an imprint on the walls. Respect should never depend on appearances. It should never be selective. It should never require someone to prove their worth. It should be given because every person deserves it. Daniel walked into the night carrying no revenge and no bitterness. Only a quiet certainty that dignity can stand against anything, even in a room full of wrong assumptions. He disappeared down the dimly lit street, leaving behind a night the restaurant staff would never forget, and a lesson the city would carry far beyond its walls. The story settled into silence, but its impact kept echoing, not as noise, but as change.